Let's talk about arranging and orchestration. This is Score Study, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Brian Kroc. My band, Big Heart Machine, released a music video today for the first single from our new album, Live at the Jazz Gallery. The song is called Fanfares, and it is, ridiculously enough, my arrangement for big band of a piano etude.
Part 1. Background.
The idea of orchestrating a solo piano piece for a large instrumentation is nothing new. The patron saint of orchestration, Maurice Ravel, created orchestral versions of much of his own piano music, as well as works of other composers. His orchestration of Modest Mussorgsky's piano piece, Pictures at an Exhibition, is so successfully realized that it has usurped the original composition as the definitive version. Many other composers have undertaken similar projects, but my all-time favorite is Henry Brandt's virtuosic orchestration of Charles Ives's Piano Sonata No. 2, Concord, Massachusetts, which he entitled A Concord Symphony. You have to hear this recording. Shame on every orchestra in the world for not programming it more often. This is orchestration at its absolute best, and Brandt is clearly one of the great orchestrators of the 20th century. The magic is that Brandt manages not only to retain all of Ives's dense harmonic information, but actually to clarify it. Great pianists can coax a variety of tone colors from the keyboard, but at the end of the day, the overall sound is inevitably homogeneous. Brandt exploits the inherent character of each instrument to add a new dimension to the music, foregrounding important moments, choosing brilliant solo moments, exaggerating dynamics and formal elements in the score. It's a tour de force.
Part 2. Preemptive defense of swing.
I'm not aware of any orchestrations of piano music for jazz big band, although I'm sure some exist. When I came up with the idea to orchestrate Ligeti's Fanfares for big band, I knew it was a great idea because I couldn't stop laughing as I imagined the absurdity of it. In general, laughing while I'm working is a clear sign that I'm on the right track. Now, Ligeti has long been an influence on my music. In fact, my idea to have the Big Heart Machine saxophone section play recorders in my 40-minute suite Tamalpais was stolen from Ligeti's violin concerto, in which he asks the woodwind players to play ocarinas and recorders. Like you're scratching it or something. The more I thought about it, the more enticed I was by the challenges of arranging Ligeti for my big band. This would be a serious exercise of my orchestration skills, and also a borderline unreasonable challenge for my bandmates. Sounds fun. Before getting started, I had to make some decisions and set some parameters. Limitations, paradoxically, encourage innovation. I love setting rules for myself at the outset of a project and trying to stick to them as much as possible. It forces me to MacGyver my way into unconventional solutions, and in so doing, break out of my habits. Here were my rules.
1.
Keep every pitch in its written octave. Luckily, the saxophonists in Big Heart Machine are great doublers, so I didn't think this would be an issue.
2.
Don't let the omnipresent barber pole scale get boring.
See part 1 of this video series if you don't know what the barber pole scale is.
This thing repeats incessantly throughout the entire piece, something I've never heard before in a big band chart. This one would be tougher. And
3.
Create a discernible form. With such a repetitive piece of music, I felt I would need to show the audience the inner workings of the music, to open up the hood, so to speak, so we could appreciate each ingenious musical device. After I had established my ground rules, I also made some sweeping decisions about the overall vibe of the piece. First, I made the potentially sacrilegious choice to swing the eighth notes.
You can't do that.
How disrespectful.
What gall?
Whoa, let me explain. As I was looking at the tempo indication, vivacissimo, molto ritmico, it occurred to me that pianists generally seem to obey the former term while ignoring the latter. We have many fast recordings of this piece, but not very many that groove. This is to the detriment of the music, in my opinion. Ligeti, unlike many of his peers, was a fan of jazz. During a 1998 interview in Jazz magazine with the great jazz pianist Benoit Delbecq, Ligeti mentions Thelonious Monk, Duke Ellington, and Bill Evans as amongst his favorite pianists for what he describes as their touch and their poetry. In fact, when asked what place he thinks jazz occupies in 20th century music, Ligeti says, a major place, maybe the principal one, because it imposed a combination of influences. It is not African, nor Irish, nor French, not even American. It's everything altogether, the first musical expression to be multicultural. I find it very interesting because it is spontaneously creative, distant to today's commercial phenomenons that are designing popular culture. At the turn of the 30s, jazz was a unique and spontaneous explosion, the most beautiful stylistic expression of the century. I just find this fascinating. Jazz was banned in communist Hungary while Ligeti was growing up, but nonetheless, he loved to improvise at the piano. If he were born in a country without censorship, maybe he would have become a jazz musician. Who knows? Secondly, I just thought swinging the eighth notes would be funny, okay? It's well known that Ligeti had a great sense of humor. I would go so far as to say that, like other composers such as Frank Zappa and Carla Bley, who incidentally I'm making videos about for this series, humor plays a central role in his musical discourse. If you don't believe me, check out his opera, Le Grand Macabre. All this to say, I think Ligeti would have approved of my decision to swing his music, and maybe even would have liked it. I also made the preemptive decision to pay tribute to Ligeti's penchant for process-oriented composition by applying an accelerando to the entire length of the piece. My arrangement would begin at a casual 130 beats per minute and gradually accumulate velocity, culminating at around 220 beats per minute. Again, I thought this would be a challenge for the band to pull off, and also just plain funny.
Part 3. Putting it together.
Let's look at the score so I can give you a play-by-play of my orchestration decision-making. Fanfares is initiated with an upward scale marked pianissimo and sempre legato. Big bands are good at playing loud, but they are not so good at playing quietly. To help them play pianissimo, I put the trombones in bucket mutes, which decreases the volume and also widens and mellows the sound. But that's not going to be legato enough, so I added unison tenor saxophone. Now, unisons are amazing. Two instruments playing in unison will not be twice as loud, but the minute discrepancies in their intonation will add breadth and spatial dimension. That still wouldn't be legato enough. So here in measure 1, I already break my first rule.
Keep every pitch in its written octave.
I had to daisy chain each iteration of the scale together in order to fill that microscopic gap between the and of 4 and beat 1, preventing any silence from interrupting the continuous legato. However, jumping down from a B on the and of 4 to C on beat 1, a major 7th lower, simply wasn't an option. It would be impossible to play that legato. But if I make the C an octave higher, the pitch would be essentially indiscernible because each subsequent entrance will mask it as it blends with the low C's overtones. In measure 5, the fanfare-like dyads enter. I chose 2 soprano saxophones to declaim this melody, a favorite instrumental pairing of Bob Brookmeyer's, pitting them against 2 tenor saxophones in measure 13. By then, I was looking for a way to add some rhythmic interest without venturing below the middle C written in Ligeti's score. My solution was to have the bass play the C on every downbeat. I wrote it as a whole note because in that high register, the sound will decay so quickly that I needed the player to try to play it as long as possible just to make it last for an eighth note. Meanwhile, I had the pianist use her right hand to dampen the strings inside the piano while playing that C. This creates a wonderfully subtle percussive tone. At each structurally significant juncture, I tried to contrast the instrumental color. So, in measure 21, when the barber pole scale jumps down an octave, I combine the percussive transients of the piano with the slightly nasal and pinched bucket-muted trumpets. Uh-oh. I broke my first rule again. I filled out each dyad into full triads in the trumpets. At measure 31, while the soprano saxophones take care of the barber pole scale, I put the melody in the high range of the trombones, which will cut through the ensemble. I added the guitar in unison with the trombones to add some extra punch to the accents. Measure 51 marks the first appearance of a single note melodic line in the whole piece, so I knew I needed to highlight that moment. I chose to do that with some special techniques in the rhythm section. I had the guitar use some crunchy distortion, while the drummers told me to switch to sticks and play a clicky early jazz groove. I had someone like Baby Dodds in mind. Then I asked the bassist to play a Bartok Pitts on the end of 3, which means he pulls the string vertically and lets it slap harshly on the fingerboard. These things all mix into a disjointed, weird groove. There are 3 great flautists in Big Heart Machine, so I really wanted to exploit that fact at measure 68. Listen, normally you would not want to write a 3rd octave high C for your woodwind doubler friend. I knew in this particular situation that Anna Weber could easily handle that because she's a flute specialist. Similarly, I wouldn't have written such an angular line that goes all the way down to low F sharp for the bass trombone if I didn't know Jen Wharton was playing the part. Challenges are good until they become unplayable, anxiety-provoking, and angering. Know who you're writing for. You may notice that I love subtle detail. It really makes all the difference in taking your arrangement from 90% there to 100% there. Check out measure 92, where the guitar is playing artificial harmonics, while the drums switch to cymbals only. This immediately changes the sound to a tinny, trebly composite that contrasts with the preceding bass-heavy section. In measure 101, I used plungers in the low trombones to accentuate the low barber pole scale, and also for some humor. The plus line means closed, and the circle means open. And never be afraid to fully notate the drum part if you have something specific in mind. By measure 145, the tempo is really starting to move. A classic way to add motion in a jazz big band is with a walking bass line. How could I transform the 8th notes of the barber pole scale into a quarter note pulse? My solution was this: to create a long upward line that excludes the upbeats, thus retaining Ligeti's original pitches. At the last moment, I decided to add a shout chorus at measure 207. Ushered in with a drastic rallentando, I definitely broke my first rule at this moment. I fleshed out Ligeti's written pitches with really dense ensemble voicings. The listener isn't aware of all the pitches. They just hear the fat, brassy conglomerate. In general, these voicings are fairly run-of-the-mill big band voicings, because why mess with success? The trumpets usually just play upper structure triads, while the trombones provide the chord tones, with the saxophones doubling important pitches. After this brash tootie has died away, I had the drummer continue swinging alone as if the music is still playing in his head, because if you remember from the first part of this video series,
Infinity.
if you'd like to study my big band arrangement of Fanfares, there's a link in the video description to buy a score. If you'd like to try playing Fanfares with your school or community big band, you can find a link to PDFs of the score and parts. Hey guys, so in 2 weeks, Big Heart Machine's new album drops. And if you pre-order it, you'll get the Fanfares MP3 immediately. Can't wait to hear the whole record? Support me on Patreon, and you'll get the whole album today, weeks before the rest of the world. There's a lot of perks to being a patron, huh? See you next time.